Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, June 9th, 2022, and in the state of Michigan, the Republican, now frontrunner candidate Ryan Kelly has been arrested by the FBI for January 6th involvement. This is the new frontrunner for the Michigan Republican Party after 5 GOP candidates were removed from the ballot due to invalid and forged signatures on their petitions. To begin and give you a bit of a background, the state of Michigan requires that you get 15,000 valid and legal signatures to get on the Republican primary ballot. As a result, people tend to employ those to go out there and get the signatures on their behalf so the campaign can be focused on other tasks. Well, 5 GOP candidates employed clearly the wrong people and resulted in a position where most of their signatures were forged and they could not get enough to end up on the ballot. So these 5 candidates went through many court systems. They went to lower courts, they went to higher courts, and ultimately were rejected by the bipartisan Michigan Supreme Court, comprised of 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans, in which a ruling of 6-1 disqualified them and maintained that disqualification from the Board of Elections for these 5 GOP contenders. So the Republican primary was in disarray. There was no frontrunner anymore. The top contender, James Craig here, was removed. And then they did a poll. They asked voters across the state of Michigan, who do you want to lead the Republicans into the general election? And Ryan Kelly came up in first place, getting 19% of the vote when previously he was polling in the low single digits. Well, now Ryan Kelly has been arrested, and it has completely shaken up the Michigan Republican primary yet again. We started out with 10 candidates, 5 of them disqualified, an additional 1 now arrested on charges, leaving us with 4 main contenders for the GOP nomination. Now, there is no guarantee or certainty that Ryan Kelly will be charged heavily with anything or will result with himself in jail or things of that nature. But Ryan Kelly is on video encouraging insurrectors to go into the Capitol. He's declaring the insurrection on the Capitol that day to be all-out war. He says it himself on video. I mean, the evidence is clear, and honestly speaking, nobody is really pulling for him to come out of that unscathed, and it really just looks bad for your campaign. If you're arrested for any reason, if you're in handcuffs, God forbid for him that there's a photo of him in handcuffs, it would doom his campaign, and this likely already has. So now we're back to the drawing board. Now we're back to the remaining 4 candidates to figure out who is going to become this GOP nominee, who is going to become the now front runner with the 4 remaining candidates. But that's not the topic of this video. We are going to briefly talk about the remaining candidates, but the main purpose is to explore what this new development actually means for the Michigan Republican Party, because they really desperately needed to catch a break, and things really seem to be piling on for them. If you take a look at the Michigan gubernatorial election, it starts out already at a disadvantage for the GOP. They're running against an incumbent, Gretchen Whitmer, who, while not necessarily the most popular governor in Michigan, isn't exactly unpopular. There are some polls showing her in the negative, some polls showing her in the positive, but none of them really show any major movement or direction in one way or the other, meaning that voters either narrowly approve of her or they narrowly disapprove of her. And that's good news for Gretchen Whitmer, because in a year like this where Biden is down in Michigan by 10, 12, 15 points, she's hovering sometimes down by 3 or up by 5, which means she's outperforming President Biden, which already puts her at a higher level. On top of that, when you take a look at her 2018 victory, she defeated Bill Schuette by a margin of 10 points across the state. I understand it was a blue wave year, but Michigan was a state that had just voted for President Trump. You're talking about an 11-point shift across the entire state. Fast forward to 2020, it was significantly closer than it was in 2018 for obvious reason, but also Donald Trump, I would say, is an individually strong candidate in the state of Michigan. Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump by 2.8%, flipping the state by over 3 points from red to blue in the 2020 presidential election. So with electoral history taken into account, Republicans were at a disadvantage. With approval rating taken into account, Republicans were at a disadvantage. And the factor of the incumbency is the most important factor in any race, especially in a midterm election year. So with all of that considered, the GOP already had a difficult time to build themselves up. And they actually fielded a very strong candidate originally before they were disqualified from the race. And that was the former chief of the Detroit Police Department, James Craig. a Republican, and someone who was meant to represent a new envisioned Republican Party, someone whose experience was meant to conflict with this idea that the Democratic Party, or at least those who represent the Democratic Party, might have been pushing, such as reallocation of police funds, or as some would put it, defunding the police. This was meant to be James Craig's main issue, and he was meant to bring his experience and what he has learned from the police force to the governor's mansion. And he seemed, at least initially, as a very strong candidate. In fact, if you take a look at the polling data for the general election, not a single Republican left here has actually ended up defeating Whitmer in a singular poll. When you take a look at the numbers between James Craig and Gretchen Whitmer, it was back and forth. He would be up on one, she would be up on the other, and it would go back and forth, back and forth. Whitmer ultimately came out ahead narrowly by average, but by no less than a few percentage points, compared to other candidates where she's defeating them sometimes by more than 15, 20 points, to high extents 27, 28 points. Not necessarily realistic, but definitely displaying the electoral prowess that Whitmer has in this race and the inability of these candidates to win over voters, whereas James Craig had it. So when he was removed from the ballot, we were left with these 5 declared GOP nominees. But Ryan Kelly, while I personally did not expect him to win the nomination, started to do well in some of the polling data. If you take a look at the initial polls in the race, Kelly wasn't always doing the best when it came down to the numbers, starting out at 1% in February, then 4, 7, 5%, but immediately following, voters were confused. They didn't know who to go to, and they went to Ryan Kelly. He got 19% of the vote. Predictits Market actually says that Tudor Dixon, that she will win the GOP nomination. There is no guarantee that she does, but it looks better for her now that her main competition is out of the way. And you take a look at the remaining candidates, sure, Kevin Rinke is at 15%, but that's still within reachable distance for all of these candidates. But the fact that the first person that the plurality of these voters went to now is in a position where they have been arrested by the FBI goes to show that these candidates remaining were not necessarily of quality and aren't so whatsoever. You take a look at their determining factors and their descriptions, even on Wikipedia. Let me just read them off to you. Conservative media personality. Not to at all try to say that this makes you unqualified for the job of governor, but it certainly doesn't provide the level of electoral experience or governing experience, potentially speaking, that some people might look for. But then again, Donald Trump had neither, and yet he was able to do very well and was clearly loved by some voters and voted for by many. Looking at the declared list, though, I just don't see someone who is of Whitmer caliber that we see in the decline to run column, which we will go through very briefly. But you have a conservative media personality. Now you have Ryan Kelly, who has been arrested, so I'm going to remove him from the remainder of this video. We'll talk about him in terms of his event and what actually occurred and what that means for this new shakeup, but really, it doesn't really matter to consider him anymore because he's not going to win this nomination. You have a Farmington Hills pastor. You have a businessman. You have a chiropractor, businessman, and former co-chairman of Unlock Michigan. You don't have any politicians. You don't have people that can provide some level of a background that voters are seeing as intriguing or are a part of the culture wars, such as the defund the police movement that is going to be mainstream for 2022. Though, looking at those who decline to run, who do you have? U.S. representatives, incumbent U.S. representatives at that. You have former speakers of the Michigan House of Representatives, former attorney generals, former U.S. secretaries, multiple former U.S. representatives, multiple current U.S. representatives, and the incumbent majority leader of the Michigan Senate. You had so many people that could have just thrown their hat in the ring, that could have gotten the 15,000 signatures, that would be in a position where, if elevated by this disqualification in some random event, would have been able to lead the GOP easily, would have been able to put forth a good effort against Gretchen Whitmer. And I just simply cannot see how that happens now. The Michigan Republican Party is in disarray. There's always this reoccurring usage of Dems in disarray. I think it's funny, so I use it sometimes to describe both parties, but I don't ever really mean it in the truest sense. But right now, the Republican Party is very much in, lack for a better word, disarray. I don't like using it because I try to use it comically, but it is true in this case, because all of their top contenders have now been removed from the race. The two frontrunners before the disqualification were Perry Johnson and James Craig. And when you take a look at the numbers, well, they ended up losing and being removed from the race. Then you head into now a new race where the top frontrunner is being removed. It's as if everything is working out positively for the Democratic Party in a state that otherwise should have been so exceptionally competitive. We've seen Michigan in red waves, even with unpopular incumbents. In 2014, Rick Snyder won by 4.1%. That happened because the national environment was so anti-Obama that even an unpopular incumbent was still able to win because they were a Republican. You take a look back at 2010, another red wave, the Republicans won here by 18.2%, and that was following a very popular Democratic governor. The point being that in red waves, Michigan should be a red state. It should not be this state where the now betting markets are expecting the Democratic Party to have a 2 out of 3 chance at victory, where maybe a month ago they had the Republicans up by over 50% chance at a chance at victory. This disqualification combined with the arresting of Ryan Kelly puts the Democratic Party in such a favorable position. Gretchen Whitmer is one of the most lucky, or in fact, the luckiest Democratic contender in a competitive governor race because she has lucked out so many times now. She has been put in a lot of tricky positions with this governor race. She very well could have lost. It was certainly not out of the question. But now, it seems like it might be. Of course, the race could shake up. I think, Tudor Dixon definitely could win the governor's race in the state of Michigan should she win the nomination. But there's also no guarantee of that. And it also becomes a lot more difficult to see it happen when you have a Democratic governor who is doing well in the polls and even better following all of these scandals that have really taken him out a part of the Michigan Republican Party. It's really difficult to see how they end up winning. They have fought multiple times within the courts. They have fought multiple times within a lot of suits. What we are seeing is that the Michigan Republican Party just simply didn't send their best. Realistically speaking, they could have avoided all of this. 15,000 signatures to begin with was not difficult. Had Ryan Kelly been arrested, sure, it would have looked bad for the GOP, but it would not looked as bad when you have the now frontrunner of the Michigan Republican primary being arrested. I mean, I want the GOP to take a step back and realize how this looks for them and question whether or not this race is now going to be winnable. It doesn't mean they shouldn't contest for it, that they should completely give up this race because it is Michigan. It is still inherently a swing state, and Whitmer is going to win by no more than 10 at the highest amount. But it is something to consider about whether or not the Republican Party should see this as one of their most viable options when they have Wisconsin neighboring, when they have Pennsylvania neighboring, when they have the possibility of picking up other opportunities outside of the Rust Belt. Michigan might be a race that is better off left to the remaining candidates to figure out and for them to focus and allocate their resources on. Because this could be a money hole for the Republican Party. This could be a money sink. This could be a volunteer sink where they spent a lot of their time trying to win a race that became unwinnable the moment that James Craig was removed from the race, or that became unwinnable the moment that Ryan Kelly was arrested by the FBI. There are some major things that happen in extremely competitive races, and I think this is one of those turning points where it becomes very clear and very evident that Whitmer is likely going to win re-election. Again, nothing is set in stone, but I will say that it looks very, very good for Gretchen Whitmer. So, as of right now, the way and I look at it and what I think you should take away from this is that in a race that was already hard enough to win, with a 10-point incumbent, with a 3-point Biden state, and steady in terms of approval, things could not have gotten worse for the Republican Party. When you have 5 GOP candidates disqualified, one of them dropping out immediately, the other 4 petitioning, all of which losing, getting shot down by the lower courts, then by the bipartisan Supreme Court, now you have no move, some of them even contemplating write-in bids or independent bids or lieutenant governor bids for some of these candidates. At the end of the day, these top contenders were removed. And then the GOP reevaluates. They find a new frontrunner. And who do they find with this new frontrunner? Well, they have someone who has now been arrested by the FBI with video footage released of them calling the insurrection a full-blown war and encouraging people to storm the Capitol. And there is also now some thing coming out from Trump's closest advisors, those who are close to him, who we would call sources in the media, that are saying that President Trump might not even endorse in this Michigan Republican primary, which leaves much more up to the voters and a lot more contention within the race. No clearing of the field, no endorsement, which I don't personally think is going to happen, but should it happen, it would just make matters significantly worse for the GOP because they would be scrambling amongst themselves to win this race now that it's narrowed down to 4 candidates, meaning a more fractured Republican Party would come out as a result. The GOP clearly is in shambles in the state of Michigan. They went from at one point the frontrunner at winning the general election to now losing. It isn't irreversible, but it definitely is going to be difficult. Things are going to happen very, very quickly. The primary is 2 months away, and I can't imagine that things get significantly better for the GOP from here unless they change many things about the way they are approaching this race. They have so far chosen all of the wrong people, and things just simply aren't getting better quick enough. And we're only months away from the general election. Whitmer has the name recognition. She has the primary. She has everything going for her. And now she has so much more. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.